Hi everybody, welcome back to the Introduction to Climate Change course. In this lesson, we are going to talk about carbon footprints. Now, this topic is important because it starts to get at the idea of reducing the amount of carbon that we emit into the atmosphere and hopefully eventually stopping the effects of climate change. Now, we can just jump right in and ask, what is a carbon footprint? So a carbon footprint is how much carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases as well you emit from your own actions. Now, this isn't like the human emitting carbon dioxide out of your body. It's more how have your actions either caused or encouraged more carbon dioxide from being emitted. For example, buying a brand new pair of shoes when you already have like 10 pairs of shoes, right? That's kind of like unnecessary emissions, but if you think about it, because you are like, those shoes were made for you to buy them, because if people weren't going to buy them, they wouldn't have been made, and you don't really need them, right? So it's kind of just unnecessary carbon emissions, for example. Now, why should we care about carbon footprints? Well, we should care about these because, like I mentioned a bit ago, it's the key to reducing our carbon emissions as a whole planet and stopping the effects of climate change. Now, one person will not actually impact the carbon emissions of an entire planet significantly. But, if you add up small changes over 7 billion people, what happens is you start to see big results. And now, carbon footprints are not going to solve the whole problem, right? Because we need to think more about the sources of this. So, what we by sources, I mean factories, for example, or energy sources that generate electricity, power plants. Now, these things are not going to just stop emitting carbon dioxide because they are made to work with fossil fuels, right? So long term, you need to replace these with renewable energy sources. And that's a topic we're going to cover a little bit today, but more we're going to dive deeper into that in the next video. For this video, we're going to focus on just individual action. Now, in what areas of life can we cut down our carbon footprint? So there's 4 big ones that we have outlined here. We have food, energy, production, and transportation. Now, these are pretty big sources of emissions, and these are things that everybody does. And we can go into them one by one to see what is the source of emissions and how we can cut down on our emissions, see if there's unnecessary emissions that we can reduce without having to make, huge changes to our lives. So to start off with food, we want to ask, what causes emissions? Now, everything about food causes emissions as far as growing food or raising animals, transporting it, refrigerating it, packaging it, but the key in lowering emissions is that some foods are more carbon intensive than others. Now, carbon intensive just simply means how much carbon does it use or waste, right? So, for example, something that can go a long way with a little bit of fuel that emits carbon dioxide is going to be less carbon intensive than something that needs a lot of fuel to go a short distance, right? So you're emitting the same amount, but the question is, how much are you getting out of it, right? And some of the most carbon intensive foods are going to be lamb, beef, eggs, cheese. Really, the key is mostly meats. Meats by far are the most carbon intensive, and also dairy. Now, what can we do about this? We don't have to quit eating any meats or dairies altogether. That's not really reasonable, right? Instead, we can substitute some of these for greener alternatives. And now, greener you can put in quotes. Now, we don't actually mean greener foods like green vegetables. By greener, we just mean things that are more environmentally friendly. So For example, a great substitution for a lot of these meats are beans and for protein, and for a lot of nutrients, vegetables. These are great alternatives that are better for you than things like red beef, and they're also better for the environment. So that's one step that you can take to reduce your emissions as far as food. Now, on to energy. What causes emissions for energy? What causes emissions for energy is like making the actual electricity, because it requires burning fossil fuels. Now, the mechanics of a power plant are a little complicated to go over, but what almost all power plants have in common is that you need a turbine to spin, and you need steam to make that turbine spin. So how do you heat up? And steam is just water that has been heated up a lot until it turns into a gas. So you need to burn fossil fuels in order to heat that up, right? And so some power plants use more carbon intensive fuels than others, right? So for example, coal is the most carbon intensive fuel. That means it emits the most and gives you the least energy for what it emits. And then you have oil and natural gas. And then the least carbon intensive, because it actually emits zero carbon, is renewable energy. Now, renewable energy is something we want to talk about more in the next video, but pretty much it is energy that you do not need to dig up out of the ground. It is something like a solar panel or a windmill, where it just takes what it has around it and generates that into electricity, and it doesn't require to burn anything, right? Now, to reduce emissions, we want to switch to cleaner energy sources, and a lot of the time that's not in our control, because one, we actually can't really pick where our energy is coming from. That's something that our state or local governments pick, but not everybody can also afford to just put solar panels on their house, for example. But a better way that almost everybody can do is just to waste less energy. Now, wasting less energy would mean just, not leaving things on while they run. So like not leaving water on, because although water is, renewable, it's not, to get it filtered into your house, it takes energy, right? So when you're leaving the tap on, you're wasting energy. Leaving the TV on, lights on, the fan, all of these ways are good small ways to make an impact. And it also saves you money on your electricity bill. Now, how about for transportation? In transportation, pretty much every vehicle that we use, cars, planes, trains, trucks, buses, and even more, they run on fossil fuels. And some forms waste more carbon than others. And this is because, for example, in a plane takes a lot of fuel no matter what to get off the ground, right? So planes are probably the most carbon intensive ever. But, a bus, for example, is less carbon intensive than a car, because a bus is using fuel, right? But it's transporting a lot of people at once, whereas a car is using fuel to transport one person. So the emissions per person are lower. So how can we reduce transportation emissions? We want to walk or ride a bike when we can. Use public transportation. Carpool is another good version of that. And to use a car with better mileage. And mileage just means the amount of miles per gallon that you get in a car. Okay, now for production. We want to talk about as far as production, we just want to talk about how factories, no matter what, need a lot of electricity to make it. So, building materials, technology, toys, clothes, household items, and more, right? And so to reduce emissions it's the same idea as not wasting energy, right? We don't want to just buy things that we will never use, because then we're wasting that energy. And we're also filling up landfills later when we throw it out. And landfills are just mountains where your trash goes, because it needs to go somewhere, and we can't burn it or send it up to space. So it actually takes up space on our Earth. And another way to reduce the emissions from production is to switch out plastic for reusable items. Now, for example, instead of a plastic water bottle that you might buy every single day, that will add up, and eventually it'll waste a lot more energy than if you were to just buy one metal reusable water bottle and take it wherever you go. And it's also a lot of fun. For example, you can get them in nice colors. You can customize them, and they keep your drinks cool or warmer for longer, so it's actually a great alternative. There's also straws and utensils, for example. Now finally, we want to end off with a quick activity. Now just thinking back to what we were just discussing, write down in your journal 3 or 5 steps you can take in your own life to lower your carbon footprint. They can be small or they can be big commitments. And with that, we are going to end it, and in the next lesson we're going to talk more bigger picture stuff as far as renewable energy. And I'll see you in the next video.